Hi everyone, I'm Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt. So this week on Lessons from an Old Quilt, we are going to look at this really cool, heavy polyester quilt. So it is not made with traditional materials. It is a really cool quilt though. So this quilt measures 77 by 87, so it's a nice size. It fits a full-size bed and it just is cozy and warm and heavy. So I got this quilt from a farmer's market a few weeks ago. I found it at this one man's booth. He had a bunch of tools and stuff like that, and I saw this quilt hanging over the back of one of the chairs. I asked him about it and he said he got it at a house clean out and it was in the attic. It was very musty and it was just filthy. So I did bring it home and wash it. Now I washed this one because it was intact. There weren't any holes or anything like that. So I felt comfortable putting it into the washing machine and it came out just beautiful. So this quilt is a pattern called a MOCK log cabin and it's a really, really cool quilt. So let's take a look at it. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this quilt. It's incredible. So we're going to first identify the block, and I will show you that right here. And it's kind of hard to see. It's a MOCK log cabin, and I will show you how it's made. So that's the block, and if you turn it, you get this wonderful design that we see in this quilt. So it's turned and it's twisted, and that's important when we talk about the center in a moment, okay? But first I do want to show you the construction of this block. We'll get the fuzzies off of there. I went ahead and made a mock-up of this, and it is right here. So you can see it's a 5-inch block, okay? And this kind of just shows it a little bit better. So half of it is one color, the other half is this color, and the way it is built is like this. Actually, we'll flip it around so it's the same as my mock-up. And then we have this on this side, this on this side, and this on this side. And that gives you this really cool look, okay, when you sew it all together. And that's the way this entire quilt is made, or at least the top is made. Okay, what's kind of neat about it is then as you turn these blocks, you get this other pattern, and then you get these wonderful stripes, and it's a really great pattern. So the reason I really wanted to point that out is because of these stripes here. The maker did a really good job of making sure they were straight-ish at least, and going, I think when the maker made the blocks, going the same direction. And then where the maker got into trouble is when they were turned, because we have some that are straight like this and some that are going this way. So some are vertical and some are horizontal. And honestly, I didn't notice that until I started studying this quilt. So it's not a huge deal, but it is something that, I don't know, I envision, and of course I take a lot of liberties here because I imagine these makers making these quilts, and I could be right or I could be wrong. I don't know, I can just imagine the maker making all of these blocks, which it's 196 of these, and making sure meticulously that these lines are going the same direction. And when the maker started to lay these out, realized that even though these were painstakingly pieced, when the block was turned, they were going the other direction. So there's no rhyme or reason to whether they go one way or the other, but I can imagine it just being frustrating when that happened. So let's talk about the fabrics. The fabrics are a polyester blend, I believe, at least the plaid fabrics. It's like almost like a shirting fabric. It's not super heavy like a canvas, but it's also not very light. And there's definitely some polyester in there. You can kind of just by feeling it. However, the blocks in the center here are cotton. So the maker did mix those two fabrics and did it well, and it's held up really well. I'm not sure exactly when this was made. You know, polyester came into the scene in like the 1940s, so it would be after that, but it may be a more recent quilt. It could be the 60s or 70s. We do know that it was found in a house clean out and it was in the attic. So that's pretty much all I have to go on, but it held up really well. Now, you know me, I like plaids to go the right way, and although they're all going the right direction, or they're all, you know, straight, they are not matching, but I actually really like that in this quilt because I think it just gives a lot of movement and some really geometric details in this that you wouldn't have if they matched everything. And honestly, using this block, I'm not sure how they would have matched everything. That would have been pretty impossible. So the blocks are all machine done, and it is a tied quilt, so there's no quilting. Let's talk for a minute about these ties. These ties are crisscrossed and then tied, and I love that because it really gave some stability to this quilt, and it was tied in a very methodical manner. Sometimes you see them and they're just all over the place. This one is really well planned. In fact, this whole quilt was really well planned, maybe with the exception of those stripes. Unless it was intentional, maybe it was. Something else that's important is the rule of thumb is if you're tying, you use your hand as a width. So this maker used the hand as a width. I'm assuming it was a woman just because I have small hands, and if it were bigger hands, you know, it might be made by a man. I'm not sure. So that's something worth noting. It was just tied really, really, really well. There aren't any holes or tears in this, which is wonderful. There are a few minor stains, but you can't even see them with the prints. So let's take a look at the borders. Now there's only borders on the top and the bottom of this. It's a super heavy quilt, so bear with me here. And the borders are like it's a crinkly fabric. It almost feels like a organza or something. So it is a different type of fabric. So here now we're seeing 3 different types, and when we look at the back, which is flannel, we're going to see 4 different types of fabric. The batting, I believe, is just a polyester blend. I did open up one of the binding pieces and just peeked inside to see what was inside, because I thought maybe it was a blanket, but it's not. Sometimes they put quilts on top of quilts, so I wanted to peek at that. And then I did repair it, by the way. So it is all fixed. So the binding is just pulled around from the back, and you can see that the maker just zigzagged that closed. And I think that's really smart because of the polyester fabric. There might be a little bit of stretch, and that allowed this to stretch and maybe even saved it, and is in the condition that we have it in now. So let's flip it over. Look at this wonderful plaid backing. So this quilt absolutely was used. It's pilled. It has been washed. It's just, it's a cozy quilt. It's definitely a heavy cozy quilt. I can see it at like a, I don't know, a hunting cabin or something like that. It is seamed. The flannel is seamed down the center. Again, it's held up really well. Everything is done by machine, and you know, the plaids are all going the same direction. Not everything seems to be straight. So things were really well planned with this quilt. You can see the ties on the back, of course. And another thing about the ties is the maker used a heavyweight cording. It's not floss. It definitely is like a type of cording, but it held this wonderfully heavy quilt together really, really well. So what can we learn from this magnificent quilt? So the first thing is to pay attention to your fabric placement. If you're going to really be particular about a certain fabric like that stripe, make sure you know the pattern you're going to use it in. So if you're going to be turning those blocks, you know, you want to pay attention to that. Maybe use an all over print for that focus print that you would use in the middle of a pattern like this. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know for sure if that happened, but I have a feeling that the maker didn't even think about that when they were making the blocks to this quilt. So it's something to consider when we make our own. The next thing is the zigzag finish on the binding. This is just such a great idea. If you're going to be using non-traditional materials, especially stretchy non-traditional materials, this will allow for the movement of the quilt as it's being used and give it a little bit of give. And I just think that was very smart of the maker. And finally, the tying of this quilt. So this was tied really well, and I love the way the maker made an X with this heavy duty thread or cording when they tied it. So it did give it that extra stability. In many cases, we see antique quilts that have the ties in them like this, and they're torn right at the ties because there is so much wear around them. So this was really smart of the maker. It made a very durable and solid quilt. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Lessons from an Old Quilt. I have more quilts to come, so don't worry. I will be here for a little bit longer doing these episodes, and as I find more quilts, I'll bring them to you. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope you take some time to sew, and I will see you soon. Bye.